We're continuing a series titled Live Life Well, which is our church slogan, and we're digging deeper in what that means. And our desire is every year to go deeper in what it means to live life well in every area of our life. And the first 2 weeks, we focused in on why God invites us to be with him, right? There's nothing like being in the presence of God. There's nothing like being with Jesus. And there's so much that we receive when we're with Jesus. Yes, he wants to hear from us, but he also wants to speak to you. And so when we are in Jesus' presence, we hear his voice. And so in this week and next week, we're leaning a little bit more in what it means to follow Jesus. What it means to follow Jesus. And so our description to live life well is to know Jesus, follow him every day, and improve the world around you. And so you guys know what's coming up next, right? Anyone? All right, now you're going to read it with me. All right, here we go. The fourth week will be the charm. All right, to live life well, can you read it with me? Is to know Jesus, follow him every day, and improve the world around you. Because you're a little confused, we're going to do it again, okay? To live life well is to know Jesus, follow him every day, and improve the world around you. All right, I'm done, introverts, no more. All right, no more. Following Jesus is probably the most beautiful thing you will ever do in your life. It's also the most difficult thing you would do. And following Jesus or being a Jesus follower is not the same thing as being a Christian. And many times we take these two concepts and we kind of mix them and make them one, and we assume that if someone is a Christian, they're also a follower of Jesus, or if someone's a follower of Jesus, that means that they're also a Christian. And following Jesus is not just saying you're a follower of Jesus. It's a little bit more than that. It goes deeper than that. And so what does it mean to you today to be a follower of Jesus? Can I hear some of you just share with me, what does it mean to you to be a follower of Jesus? To serve others, very good. What else? To follow his footsteps, very good. Anyone else? All right. It's a good thing we're doing this series. Being a Christian is easy. All right? It might be somebody might have made it difficult for you depending on what church you started, right? Or what the rules or laws were. But being a Christian is easy. Usually to be a Christian is that someone will give you a list of things that you're supposed to do and things that you're not supposed to do, right? The day that you're supposed to show up to church and the other days that you're not supposed to. Like the meetings you're supposed to show up and the things you're supposed to serve in and how you're supposed to give. Like being a Christian usually requires a list, and it's easy because the list is pretty straightforward. You look at the list, you do the list. You do the list, you're done, right? But Jesus never called us, Jesus never called us to be Christians. Some of you kind of looking at me cross-eyed. Jesus never called us to be Christians. As a matter of fact, the people that followed Jesus were not called Christians until way later after they had started following him. As a matter of fact, the word Christian was actually kind of a slur. It was kind of a word that they had put together to look down on the people that called themselves Jesus followers. And so if you were called a Christian, it was not a good thing, it was a bad thing. Those that did not know God, did not believe in God, used that phrase to kind of differentiate those that were of the culture and those that followed Jesus. And so we see that word show up later on in Acts, but when Jesus started his movement, the movement was not called Christianity, and the people that followed Jesus were not called Christians, they were called followers. It's because during Jesus' time, there was men called rabbis who were teachers. And a rabbi would have anywhere from 10, 20, 30 men that would show up to him and say, I want to learn from you. Teach me all that you know. You see, there was no Google back then. So you had to actually follow someone to get information from, right? And so they would follow a rabbi throughout the rest of their life. And the goal was to learn everything they could learn from the rabbi to hopefully one day they themselves could be a rabbi and have followers that now would follow them. The idea was that a rabbi had figured out how to live life, you know it, right? Well, they had learned it. And because they had figured out how to live life well, or to live their best life or truest life or deepest life, other people wanted to learn how to live that life. They wanted the deepest answers. They wanted to have the deep conversations. They wanted to problem solve their life. And so a rabbi was someone that had mastered life. And so when Jesus started his movement, he was this healer. He was this teacher. Jesus was a game changer. I heard recently on one of these sports radios, they were interviewing someone that has won a lot in sport, in football more specifically, and they were kind of talking about the Dallas Cowboys. Any Dallas Cowboy fans in the house? I'm so sorry for you. But the pain is not new to you, so embrace it. That's what I told my best friend, embrace it. And so he was talking about, they kind of asked him, what are the Dallas Cowboys missing? It was actually Deion Sanders. And Deion Sanders said what they're missing is, they're missing their best players making great plays in the most important games. In other words, he says they need game changers. Jesus was a game changer. Everywhere Jesus showed up, the game changed. Everywhere Jesus interacted, people had something different now in their lives. Everyone Jesus touched, Jesus did a miracle, and so Jesus was a game changer. He was a game changer. And the most interesting thing about Jesus that kind of moves me is that Jesus was not like everyone else, and he loved them. And people looked at Jesus and did not see themselves in Jesus, and they loved him back. Like, that does not happen in our world today. Like, we don't love the people that are opposite to us. We love the people that we associate with the most. And so naturally, you would not be a Dallas Cowboy fan, right? Unless you just like losing. That's a different topic. All right. Now, Jesus one day invited a man that fascinates me to follow him. His name was Simon Peter. Now, Simon Peter has spent most of his life hanging out with fishermen and hanging out with fish. You know what happens when you hang out with fish so long? You begin to smell like fish. Right? Your skin kind of becomes the same texture as fish because you kind of don't bother bathing anymore. You begin to kind of look like a fish, maybe, I don't know. I haven't hung out with fish that long and I'm not planning to. But Peter was a fisherman, and he had spent his whole life with fish, and so Peter was kind of rough around the corners. He was not gentle or kind or patient. Peter was kind of rough-spoken. Peter was like a dude's dude that was out in the sea all day fishing, and that was his life. He was like the best fisherman ever. And the Bible tells us about Peter, and Peter's life takes a turn, constant turns and constant change. And who we meet Peter to be at the beginning of his story is not the same person that we meet at the end. There's something that's happening in Peter's life that's changing, that's evolving, that's morphing into something different. You see, Peter was becoming. He was changing. And whether you know this or not, or want to accept it or not, maybe you're also becoming or changing in this very moment. As far as I've experienced, and I know every single human being on this planet is constantly changing. You might think to yourself right now and say, well, Ruben, I never change. I do the same thing every single day. I eat the same thing every single day. I watch the same thing every single day. You're changing. Because every day you learn something new, and every day you adapt a little bit more. This morning you woke up and did not expect 35-degree weather, and so maybe you were coming out with a light shirt or a shirt, and you decided to change, right? Because you were adapting to the circumstances and scenarios. We're constantly changing. And we talked about at the beginning of this series, whatever I focus on, wherever I focus or spend time on, that's what I become. So who are you becoming today? I imagine that Peter wanted to become the best fisherman. He wanted to become the strongest fisherman. He wanted to be the best fisherman. But one day, everything changed for Peter. Peter wanted to become something, but then he was introduced to something completely different. I read in a book somewhere, I'm not going to tell you where, but I read a book somewhere that usually people that are 80 years plus are either the kindest, most loving people on earth, or they're not. I kind of spent some time thinking about that. I'm like, is this true or is this just mean, right? And the more I thought about it, the more true it was. Like, some of the kindest and most loving, gracious, forgiving people I have ever met are over 80 years old. And some of the not so kind and not loving and not patient and rude people I've ever met are over 80 years old. Now, I think that because we're constantly changing and becoming something, by the time we get to 80, 85, 90 years old, we're kind of becoming that final version. We are. There's less time to change. There's less time to evolve. There's less time to experience different things. And so whatever we've been becoming throughout our entire life, that's almost the final version. That's like either the masterpiece or not so masterpiece, right? And so I have to ask myself the question today, who am I becoming? Like, what am I focusing on, and what's changing me, and what are the things that are moving me from one thing to another, and how do I process pain today compared to how I processed it 10 years ago, and how do I make a decision today based on how I made it yesterday? Like, how am I becoming, but more importantly, what am I becoming? Peter one day was putting up his nets, and he had been fishing all night fishing. All night he had been throwing that net, bringing it in, throwing the net, bringing it in, throwing the net, bringing it in. Now, that's not too bad for Peter because Peter had done this for years. It was natural. The worst part about that night wasn't that he had spent all night fishing. The problem was that he spent all night fishing and caught nothing. It's frustrating, right? When you're trying to do something, you're doing it at the highest of your capacity, but there's no outcomes, there's no fruit, there's no return. Like, you put in the work, you put in the time, you build the connections, you networked, you did everything that you could do, but you're running now on empty. And Peter's coming back home and he's on empty. He has nothing to show for it. And so the book of Matthew tells us that Jesus shows up as Peter is doing this. He looks at Peter, he looks at his brother, he looks at some other men and say, hey, you all, you're done fishing. Why don't you leave your boats, leave your nets, and follow me? And the remarkable thing about how Matthew writes is that he kind of says that they dropped their stuff and followed Jesus. Now, if I read that at first glance and I don't know context, I haven't read any other gospels, I'm like, that's crazy. Like, how does somebody just drop all of their belongings, their profession, their family, their home, their friends, their community, and just say, I'm just gonna follow this dude that I just met today. I don't know where I'm going, I don't know how long it's gonna take, but sounds like a great idea. I thank God that we have 4 gospels, because if that's the remedy or if that's the way to follow Jesus, we're kind of in trouble, because I don't know how many of us are going to leave everything behind and just follow randomly and who knows where and to who and to do what. And so Luke kind of goes into a little bit more detail about how Peter that day kind of was putting up those nets. Now, I imagine Peter's just a little bit tired. He's ready to go home, get a warm meal, but then Jesus shows up, and it says in Luke chapter 5, verse 1, that Jesus was standing on the lake of Gennesaret, and the people were crowding him and listening to the word of God. In other words, Jesus is teaching. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, hey, Simon, why don't you go back out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch? So we have a little bit more context here than Matthew, that Jesus has been teaching part of the day on Peter's boat. Peter has been washing his nets and probably listening to what Jesus is teaching. Peter is beginning to change. Peter is receiving new information. Peter's understanding God in a different light. Peter's understanding something new that he's never heard before, and Peter's attention is fully on Jesus. And so Jesus takes him from something spiritual, from being with God and knowing about God, to now an action, to a test, to a tough situation, to do something that Peter has never done before. You see, fishermen fished, and they usually fished at night with nets because during the night, the fish couldn't see the nets. And the way that fish moved during the night was better at night than during the day for fishermen to go out and catch as much fish as they could. Now, you remember, Peter has been fishing all night and caught nothing. And now Jesus says, hey, Peter, I know you've been fishing all night, but I want you to do something. Yes, I'm a teacher and preacher, but you got to trust me on fish. And I think this is what Jesus does so masterfully in our lives every single day. Jesus will show you something new about himself. He will show you something new about the Father, and then he will come back at you and say, hey, I know you're a good accountant. Hey, I know you're a good student. I know you're a good friend, father, mother, son, daughter. Hey, I know you're a good employee. Hey, I know you're trying to be a good Christian, but I'm going to want you to go in a different direction today. I want you to do the same thing you do every day, but I want you to do it differently today. And so Simon kind of looks at Jesus and says, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because what? If something has happened in Peter, that there's been a trust or faith built up in these moments of being with Jesus, that Peter says, hey, Jesus, this is not what I'm supposed to do. This is not what I want to do, but because you're saying it, I will let down the nets. And so Peter goes out with his men, and they go out into the sea, and they throw out the nets, and they begin to catch large numbers of fish. And they didn't catch just one or two. Luke tells us, he goes into detail that says that there's catching so many of them that those nets that they had worked on for years, those nets that were trustworthy, those nets that never broke, those nets now can't handle the weight of the fish, and they've never seen this before. There's something miraculous that happens in our lives when we allow Jesus to begin to guide our lives. When we go from being Christians and just doing things to do them, and we begin to follow Jesus with our hearts. You see, Jesus will lead you to an unexpected situation, not to make you uncomfortable, not to make you miserable, but for you to be able to see his power, his wisdom, his knowledge, his presence, his love in a way that you've never experienced it before. What if Jesus today wanted to take you from being an unbeliever, a Christian, just to become a follower of Jesus? What if there was something deeper that God had for your life today? What if it was a deeper understanding of his love? What if it was deeper faith? What if it was deeper trust, deeper commitment, deeper generosity? What if there was something more? I imagine Peter being blown away as we would, right? It's like asking God for $1,000 to meet, the needs of the month, and then God drops 10,000 on your lap. You don't know what to do. And so Peter calls the other boats. And he says, we can't do this on our own. You guys need to be part of this miracle. And he calls the other boats that are partners, and they came and they helped them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. They're sinking. Like they would have been content with 20, 30 fishes at night. Now their boats are sinking because they have too many fish inside the boat. Hey, imagine if you were praying for something right now, but what God wants to give you, are you following? What God wants to give you is so much bigger, greater, and wider than what you're asking for. What if the joy you're experiencing today could be multiplied by 10 or 100 if you were following Jesus? What if the forgiveness and grace and mercy that God pours in your life could be multiplied tenfold because now you're opened up to seeing Jesus and following Jesus wherever he may lead you? When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." When you begin to follow Jesus, not only do you begin to recognize who Jesus is, Not only do you begin to see all of his beauty and power at the same time, and not only are you constantly torn from one idea to the other about his nature, but also we recognize our nature. We recognize that we have no business being in front of Jesus, beside Jesus, or behind Jesus. We recognize that we're nothing like Jesus. And so Peter falls down on the floor and he says, I'm a sinful man. Did you know that there's 2 prerequisites to follow Jesus? Did you know that? The first prerequisite to follow Jesus is that you need to be a sinner. If you're not a sinner, you can't follow Jesus. Right? The reason that Jesus came to the world is to call sinners out of sin into repentance in a relationship with Jesus. So, if you're not a sinner, then Jesus is not calling you. Now, if you are a sinner and a well-known sinner, Jesus is calling you. Jesus wants you to follow him. Jesus wants to live intimately with you because he knows your condition. He knows your status. He knows your past. He knows your current situation, and he wants to lead you through it. If you're a sinner today, Jesus says, come and follow me. I want to make you fishers of men. Peter was a sinner. He was a broken sinner. And so he falls down at Jesus' feet and says, Jesus, I'm not worthy to be in your presence. I'm not worthy to be in this boat. I'm a sinner. In other words, what Peter's trying to do is distance himself from Jesus and the calling that Jesus is about to make. And Jesus says, I know. I know you're a sinner. I know what you thought when I asked you to take the boat deeper. I know all the bad things and the bad names you thought about me. I know you called me a teacher and not a fisherman. I know you thought I knew nothing about fish. And now you realize that I do, so you recognize that you're a sinner. There's 2 prerequisites. The first one is you need to be a sinner. The second one is that you need to have some doubt. In other words, that you need to come to Jesus with things that you don't believe. There's not one human being that came to Jesus or that Jesus encountered that fully believed in Jesus. There hasn't been one human being that fully believed and fully knew all of who God was and had all the answers about God and the universe. Every single human being has doubt. Every single human being has unbelief inside their hearts or minds. Every time we're in a pressing situation, our beliefs are challenged. And it happens every day. It happens more than you believe. So it says that Peter and his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And some of them were James and John and the sons of Zebedee and Simon's partners. And then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish what? For people. You will fish for people. And so they pulled their boats up on the shore. They left everything and they followed Jesus. Right? This version makes a little bit more sense, right? It's a little bit more complete. Peter has this full experience, life experience, changing experience with Jesus. Jesus showed up to his life. Jesus taught him about God and himself. And then Peter tried something he had never tried before. And because of that, he experienced God's power in his life. Peter says, my life was great, but it's become better. Fish were okay, but Jesus is better. You know what? I was okay with eating fish the rest of my life and living in that home, but I'd rather walk with Jesus and walk out into the uncertain because of who this man is. You see, when you encounter Jesus and I encounter Jesus, it challenges us. It challenges us to leave everything or leave something. Because we can't keep both things. We can't hold on to both. We can't hold on to our past and hold on to Jesus. I can't hold on to resentment and hold on to Jesus. I can't hold on to the failures of the past and hold on to Jesus. I can't hold on to comfort and hold on to Jesus. I can't hold on to the past way of living my life and hold on to Jesus. When Jesus invites you to follow, it means that it requires a sacrifice of leaving something behind. And so Peter began to follow Jesus. He became a Jesus follower. And so he left everything. And in that process of following Jesus, something happened in Peter's heart. It was a slow process because probably the slowest process that we'll ever experience is becoming more like Jesus. It doesn't happen in a moment. It doesn't happen in a week. It doesn't happen in a year. It happens throughout our lifetime. It happens in consequent decisions of choosing Jesus today and choosing Jesus tomorrow and choosing Jesus the next day and over and over and over again. And so that's what Peter did. This slow process of working out Peter's salvation. Sometimes Peter had great days and sometimes Peter had terrible days. Sometimes he was really good about following Jesus and other days he was going the opposite direction. There were some days that he was a great friend and companion with the disciples, and there was other days that he felt like punching some in the face. And when Jesus' most critical moment arrived, Jesus confronted Peter and he said, Peter, I know you want to follow me all the way to the cross. I know you want to show off in front of the disciples that you can tolerate more pain, that you would never leave me. But tonight, Peter, after I'm arrested, you're going to deny me 3 times. 3 times you're going to be asked if you follow me, if you're more than a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, and 3 times you're going to say no. And Peter looked at Jesus being this man full of pride and strength and courage and says, Jesus, I will never do that to you. And so it happened that night. Jesus is arrested and Jesus' words come true. 3 times Peter is asked, are you a follower of Jesus? Were you the one closest to Jesus when he multiplied, the bread and the fish? Were you there that day when Jesus healed that man that couldn't walk or couldn't see? Were you there when Jesus healed that man with leprosy? I thought I saw you. 3 times, Peter denied Jesus. See, many times I looked at this story and I'm frustrated. I'm mad at Peter. Like, Peter, man, Jesus did everything for you. Like, Peter, how could you deny him? You've been following him for years. You left your home, your parents, you left your job. And when Jesus needs you most, you said that you have nothing to do with him, that you don't know him, that you don't follow him. Like, come on, Peter. You needed to step up. You needed to be a game changer. You needed to take that situation in control, and you need to guide that. You need to be the leader for the disciples. Jesus is out, and you need to step up, Peter. Recently, the Holy Spirit has been leading me to see this story in a different light. The story says that after Peter denied Jesus 3 times, he ran away. And not just ran away that he's afraid that he's going to be caught. He runs away in pain. He runs away because his heart is breaking, because he realized that he has done something not only that caused pain on himself, but that has caused pain on Jesus. And the worst part is that Jesus prepared him for that moment. And so he feels that he has failed his rabbi, failed his teacher, failed his friend, and he feels empty inside. And so the only thing, the most natural thing to do when you feel that way is to run away. And to run as fast as you can and hope that you can outrun the pain and outrun the situation and outrun the circumstance. But I'm sure that he ran and he kept running, but you can't outrun what's inside you. The way I'm looking at this story now is a little bit different. Because I no longer see this moment for Peter as a moment of weakness or failure. I see it as a moment of growth. Because I think if this would have happened to Peter day 1 of following Jesus, he probably would have denied him and not even blinked an eye. He probably would have denied him and kept living like if nothing happened. But because he's shared time with Jesus and built a relationship with Jesus, because he has grown close to who Jesus is and Jesus has grown close to him, the moment that he's messed up and betrayed Jesus, there's pain in his heart. Something has broken. Something needs to be mended. Something needs to be healed, and he knows, he feels it. The number one characteristic that every follower of Jesus has is that they're becoming like Jesus. The strongest character trait that God has, the best one, the one that is most highlighted, is what John says in John chapter 4, that God is love. If you're following Jesus, then more love will show up in your life. And I believe that this moment of Peter is a moment of love because he feels love for Jesus and he feels that he has betrayed the one he loves. You can't feel that if you don't love someone. You don't go through that process of pain and agony if you have never felt or sacrificed or bought into the idea of following Jesus. The ultimate test of a follower of Jesus is not how much you know, not how many of the doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist Church you can recite or how many of the 10 Commandments you remember. It's not even how many times you come to church or how many times you give or how many times you serve. It's not how involved or little involved you are with the ministry of God or the kingdom of God. It's how much love is in your life right now. Like, are the people closest to you right now, the people that you share a roof with, would they say today that you're more loving today than you were last year? Would they say that you're more forgiving today than you were last year or the year before that? Would they say that you're more kind, patient, joyful, hopeful than you were 5 years ago? You see, when we follow Jesus, Jesus begins to pour his love into our lives, and we don't do anything. We just open up our lives and say, Jesus, I want to follow. And if I continue to follow, I become like the one I follow. And so without even realizing or noticing, I become more like Jesus than I was yesterday and the day before. And the people that are closest to me now experience something different. It's not Ruben 2.0. It's not Ruben who's changed his life and turned it around. It's not Ruben who realized he needed to do some self-help and self-examination. No, it's something life-changing. It's something different that can't be explained and can't be found in a textbook. It's something that you feel and you can learn and you can sense. Those that follow Jesus should be the most hopeful people on this planet. Not just for ourselves, but for the world. Because God so loved the world that he sent his only son to die into the world. He didn't send his son after we believed. He didn't send his son once we were ready. He didn't send his son when we had gotten our acts together. He didn't send his son when we were sinless. He sent his son when we were full of sin. When no one wanted to save us, when no one wanted to come close to us, when everyone was watching from a distance, God was hopeful for humanity because Jesus was coming into the world. So followers of Jesus, God's love begins to fill your heart and your mind. You become so full of love, listen, that you even begin to love your enemies. Yeah, the person that votes differently than you, I begin to love them because I'm not a Republican follower or a Democrat follower. I'm a Jesus follower. The person that did me harm or the person that makes my life impossible, the one person that, always gets in my way, I begin to love them differently, not because I naturally want to or one day I woke up and I thought it was a good thing to do, but because Jesus loves his enemies. Because Jesus died for those that were far from him. Jesus died from those that hurt him. And so I begin to have that same love in my life. Follower of Jesus, how are you loving those that have caused pain and suffering in your life? How are you loving your enemies today? Peter ran far, far, far away, and Jesus died. You can imagine Peter's now feeling and thinking, how am I going to make this right? He's dead. How am I going to explain to him that it was a moment of weakness, that I was afraid for my life? How am I going to explain to him that in that moment I was confused and I felt alone? How am I going to explain to him that I still loved him even though I betrayed him? So Jesus, on On the third day, he rose. And Jesus begins to show up to people that are hurting and suffering because he's been missing, because he's dead. They think he's not coming back, and he begins to show up. And he shows up to his disciples who one morning are beside a sea that most likely they had been with Jesus before. Maybe it's the same spot where Peter had left his boats, his nets, his families to follow Jesus. The Bible says that Jesus shows up and they think it's a ghost. They think it's a ghost. They think he's not real. But then as he gets closer, they realize it's flesh and blood. It's Jesus. He's come back from the dead, and they're so excited. And before Jesus does anything for them besides, the initial breakfast, he shows up in front of Peter and he asks Peter 3 questions. He shows up, and it says in John 21 that he shows up to Peter and says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He doesn't scold him. He doesn't say, "I told you so." He doesn't tell him how much he messed up. You see, Jesus senses his heart. A follower of Jesus is hurting, and Jesus' mission is to heal his heart. So he says, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter goes on and says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And so he says, "Feed my lambs." Once again, Jesus comes back and says, son of John, do you love me?" And he says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep." Third time, because the first time and second time weren't enough, Jesus says to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt. He's hurting deep inside. And he says, "Jesus, you know I love you. You know this. You know all things. You know that I love you." And so Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." Now, Peter's not a finished product. He's a broken product that's learning to follow Jesus, learning to love Jesus, and Jesus is trying to redirect him from his pain, from his bitterness, from his hurt, to now loving other people. The funny thing is that Peter didn't get that lesson that day, because look at what he does. Then he said to him, "Follow me." This would be a nice way to wrap up the sermon and the story, but I can't. Because Peter says, he turned, he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, which is John, who was following them. And he says, "Jesus, what about that guy? I love you. I've told you 3 times. I'm hurting, but I know he's done stuff. Like, I know he's thought stuff. Like, he's told me some stuff, Jesus, that you probably know because you know all things. How about him? Are you going to tell him, ask him the 3 questions now?" Peter is growing. He's not perfect. He's not all there yet. He's learning to follow Jesus. He's learning what it means to be patient and kind and soft-spoken. He's learning how to have self-control. He's not all there yet. And because Peter is not all there yet, I know that we're not all there yet. I know that we have our issues in following Jesus, that certain things get in the way. There's been moments where we prayed and wanting to follow Jesus in a different way, and the outcome of the prayer was not in our favor, and so we question and we struggle. Whether we've lost a loved one, where we lost our job, or we just lost in life, we're just struggling to follow him, and we're not all there. But the beautiful thing is that Jesus keeps calling. That Jesus keeps coming after you, that Jesus keeps searching for you, that Jesus is wanting to get you there eventually. I just need to be willing to choose him today. So who are you becoming like today? Peter kept growing, and we're going to kind of slide through these texts of how Peter writes later on about Jesus' love. And he's writing about who the church is now. And he says to the churches, "You come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God. And you're precious and precious to him. You also," he says, "you like me who are following Jesus, like living stones, we're being built. We're being changed. We're being transformed into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." This is the same guy that denied Jesus 3 times. This is the same guy that kept putting his foot in his mouth. This is the same guy that was just so rash in making decisions. This is the same God that said, Jesus, I will never abandon you. As a matter of fact, whatever they do to you, they're going to do to me. I'm open, and then ran away the first shot he had. But now he's understanding that Jesus is not expecting him to be a perfect product or a perfect Christian, but Jesus just invited him to follow. So what's your next step today? What if Jesus was not expecting you to be this perfect person? What if Jesus was not expecting you to know all things about God? What if Jesus didn't want you to be involved in everything and serve in everything or give everything away? What if he was just calling you today to follow him? What if he's just calling you to follow him today? Can you trust him with today? Can you trust him with that one situation that's getting in the way? Can you trust him with an empty net? And can you trust him with a net full of whatever you're needing? Can you trust him with your children and your spouse? Can you trust him with your finances and your job? Can you trust him to follow him? Out of everything and everyone and every situation in the world and possibly universe, Jesus is going to be the only one that calls you to pour into you, not to draw out of you. He's not expecting anything from you. He just wants to be with you. And the more you spend time with Jesus and you learn to trust him and you learn to follow, the more you become like him. It's not something you have to do or impose on yourself or expect on yourself. He doesn't expect it on you. Why should he expect it on yourself? He just wants you to be. He just wants you to trust him with every step and every moment and every decision and every crisis and every loss. And today he's coming close to you and saying, do you trust me? Do you want to follow me? Like I'm willing to follow you through the halls of your school into your classroom. I'm willing to hang out with you when you just want to be, alone and quiet. I'm willing to help you and be your strength and your wisdom and just your help whenever you're down and you're out. I'm willing to fight your battles. Maybe you're here today, you're watching online, and you've just been struggling with this because the Holy Spirit has been speaking in your heart. You've been feeling this uneasiness about life, and every day that you wake up, you just have this pressure maybe on your mind or your chest just don't feel easy. Maybe you're struggling right now to make a decision or to get through a tough situation, to keep things together. And Jesus is inviting you to follow him. All you have to do is take that first step. All you have to do is to be willing to say, okay, Jesus, I don't know where we're going. I don't know how you're going to do this, but I'm going to follow. I'm going to do whatever you put in front of me. I just want to follow you. You lead. If you're ready to take that next step today, whether it's just making that personal decision, then while we pray today, I invite you to speak with Jesus and let him know what's going on and how you want to move forward. Maybe today Jesus has put that impression in your heart that you need to give your life fully to him, and you want to discover what that is or what it looks like. I'm going to be right up front after the last song with the elders, whether to pray with you or to encourage you to listen. So if anyone here today needs just someone to listen or pray, or you need to make that decision to give your life to Jesus through baptism or joining the church, please come up. Please come up. Jesus is calling. Today is your first step. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that you don't give up on us. That even when things get difficult and tough, and even when we don't have the answers or the resources, connections, you're willing to step in. You're willing to walk alongside of us and guide the way. You're willing to show us new ways and new places and new thoughts. But most of all, Father, you're willing to be with us, to help us become our deepest and truest selves. You're willing to be hopeful for us when no one else is, and we aren't hopeful about ourselves. So, Father, I pray your Holy Spirit move right now to impress our hearts for whatever that next step may be for us right now, whether it's trusting you with a situation, a decision, or whether it's giving our hearts to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.